This video will serve as a preservation of the missteps and writing of Rings of Power. I offer no rage, but insight. It is a common tale nowadays. A massive corporation appropriates a story and changes its themes to suit corporate values. Rings of Power has the same tale and many flaws, but today I want us to look beyond the cracks of the surface and focus on Galadriel and the themes. Galadriel in Rings of Power is unwise, brutish, and brash.
That would leave me little choice but to shout for your minders.
Suppose the words never manage to escape your throat.
Her main conflict is internal, centering around the question of what separates good from evil. Galadriel is characterized by the show very quickly that vengeance is her vice, and she is willing to sacrifice those in her command to chase it, even on only assumptions, and every episode reveals more about her brutish nature to the audience. This flawed protagonist approach immediately costs her credibility for the audience, but that does little for her character arc, instead often working against the writing itself. Her guiding compass in the show is her vengeance for her brother, and one of the main themes of the show. Sometimes to find the light, we must touch the darkness.
Until we have touched the darkness.
Even contained only within the writing of Rings of Power, there is no support of this idea as Galadriel embraces her own inner darkness but finds no light, yet there is also no resolution to be found in this flawed value. Even worse is that this idea is poisonous in the world of Tolkien, as internal virtue leads to good and internal vice grows into evil. It is an attempt at repurposing Tolkien to contradict and replace the values present in his work, and it falls flat in every way, finding no support or resolution within the show it was written for. A theme much more intrinsic to the show, however, is that evil deceives. For a tale about Sauron's rise to power through gifts and deception, it is fitting. The delivery of this is through Galadriel's companion, Halbrand.
Halbrand.
He lacks virtue, but unlike Galadriel, never claims it is for good ends. He's even discovered on the ocean, which is a symbol and a character of its own in the show, representing Galadriel's internal conflict about knowing evil when it pretends to be good. Halbrand is everything Galadriel is not: charismatic, diplomatic, and patient. And he accidentally becomes the audience surrogate character because of this, acknowledging truths about Galadriel that lurk in the audience's mind but are so rarely acknowledged in the dialogue. This isn't to say that the audience is simply rooting against Galadriel or anything malicious, but rather is hoping for a catalyst event that will change her into a wiser and virtuous protagonist.
Usual battlefield, is it?
As Galadriel persuades those around her into doing what she wants, they all usually eventually give way to Galadriel's brutish persuasion. So when a character does not, it stands out and even gives a voice to the audience. Halbrand is simply one of these characters as he teaches her about diplomacy and is one of the only characters that actively challenges her. Ironically, it's also the only character that she actively admires because he represents her moral compass.
To send 5 ships.
Personal darkness is necessary to reach good ends, which mirrors Halbrand's belief that he has survived because he is not virtuous. However, Halbrand appears to show guilt over his past, unlike Galadriel, which challenges her guiltless mantra to touch the darkness. Although she is using him to gain favor with the Númenóreans, finding light for herself becomes tied to Halbrand finding light. She seems set up for a tragic fall here, and the audience can only hope that regardless of his past, she will learn something from him. This brings us to the only other character to challenge her beliefs, Adar. Galadriel and Adar face off in a battle of wills, and she inevitably loses. Minutes prior to this, she told Halbrand that one cannot quench thirst by drinking seawater. Within the story itself, this makes little sense coming from Galadriel due to how it runs antithetical to finding light by touching darkness, when darkness is seawater. As she confronts Adar, Galadriel wields her dagger, the symbol of her darkness and vengeance, and quickly loses her temper, speaking with cruelty of killing all of his kind and making sure he is the last so that he knows his offspring are dead and suffers. The obvious irony is that Galadriel speaks with villainy and Adar speaks with virtue, of finding a home for his children and killing Sauron, despite Galadriel being the protagonist and Adar the antagonist. Beneath the surface, however, Adar has crushed Galadriel in every way. He takes away her purpose for living, which is fighting Sauron, He believes his dark deeds are towards a good cause. This runs parallel to Galadriel's belief about darkness as the means to light ends. It climaxes in Adar telling her that he is not the only elf transformed by darkness. In this moment, Adar becomes sympathetic to the audience because he speaks for the audience, again as one of the only characters to challenge Galadriel to progress her character arc. Flawed protagonists learn harsh lessons, and this is a moment the audience has been waiting for, in which the show can finally acknowledge and lead to resolution of Galadriel's questionable morality. But there is no transformation. Instead, Galadriel becomes an exposition machine for virtuous themes immediately following this. But of course they're meaningless because Galadriel has zero audience credibility still, when there is no persuasion that anything has changed her ways. Among this exposition includes guesswork hollows the mind. This is probably why Galadriel's mind is so hollow. She is willing to endanger her elves for guesswork over Sauron. She also says that calling dark deeds good darkens the heart. This is entirely virtue ethics, which has already been undermined by Galadriel's morality and undermined by the theme for the entirety of the show. The last one is that all wars are fought both within and without. The problem is that the audience isn't convinced that Galadriel is aware of this. Galadriel is losing her internal battle. The audience has known it from the first episode, but she continues to be unaware of it and stagnates. These ideas are the payoff for something that has not been built, an expectation of the lessons Galadriel will see at the end of her arc. Instead, here they are weightless, hollow, and unconvincing. Now we get to the finale of this arc. Evil deceives. We reach the season climax, set in the ocean, a character in itself representative of Galadriel's internal conflicts. Halbrand continues to manipulate her, but once again we have a battle of wills that Galadriel loses. Halbrand is able to say that he never once pushed Galadriel into action, he simply needed to not get in the way of what she desired. Once again, the audience is spoken for by an antagonist because he instigates the catalyst event that will end the protagonist's stagnation and cause the transformation of her into the hero we know and love. But that is not what happens. Galadriel learns nothing. She's in over her head at this point. The dagger, her symbol of vengeance and darkness, is sacrificed. Symbolically, this would be reasonable to assume it is her transformation and letting go of her vengeance in the next step in her arc, but it is not. Even after learning Sauron's identity, she plays directly into his hand with the same brash and unthoughtful disposition. She tells no one about Sauron's existence or his goals, and does exactly what he wants again by crafting the rings. At this point, Galadriel has completely lost the audience. She has no redemption, no transformation, and nothing learned. She is completely and utterly lost to Sauron inside and out. The unsung truth about Galadriel is that evil hides in her, and that is why she is an asset to even greater evils. The only characters who will acknowledge this are the villains, oftentimes stating truths about Galadriel that the audience has understood since episode 1. Galadriel's arc ends in complete hopelessness. No redemption, no transformation, nothing learned. Only the villains are able to speak meaningfully about the themes. Rings of Power not so subtly attempts to deconstruct and repurpose the values of Tolkien's work. It immediately contradicts the virtues in Lord of the Rings, then gives no support to those claims. Galadriel's brother might be the most insidious character in Rings of Power, because he's not simply an inserted character who guides Galadriel down a path of ruin, but the voice of a corporation attempting to seize control of a beloved tale. In the end, however, $500 million cannot silence Tolkien. Even in Rings of Power, Tolkien's understanding of the corrupting nature of evil is the only lesson that reaches through to the audience.
Until we have touched the darkness.